My father looked at my fiancé, laughed, and said he would never walk me down the aisle because no daughter of his was marrying a warehouse worker. 30 seconds later, I walked toward the altar alone, while 132 guests watched in complete silence. Then something happened that my father never saw coming. 28 people stood up, one after another, not because they pitied me, but because they knew the man he had spent years looking down on. My name is Laura Voss. I was 35 years old, and I thought the hardest part of my wedding would be saying my vows. I had no idea the real test would be deciding whether I still needed my father's approval to begin my own life. Chapter 1. The aisle my father thought he owned. I was standing in front of the old mirror in the bridal room at Willow Ridge Chapel when I heard my father say he would not walk me down the aisle. The mirror had probably reflected hundreds of brides before me, women smoothing veils, checking lipstick, trying to memorize the last few minutes before their lives changed. My dress fit exactly the way it had during the final fitting. My hair was pinned into the soft twist I had chosen months earlier. The white roses in my bouquet were fresh enough that droplets of water still clung to the stems. Everything looked right. Nothing felt right. The door between the bridal room and the hallway was thin, and Victor Voss had never been a man who lowered his voice when he believed he was right. I am not standing in front of 132 people and pretending I am proud of this, he said. My Aunt Celia told him to keep his voice down. My father gave a short, humorless laugh. I have kept my voice down for 8 months. Today, she gets to face the consequences of her choice. His choice of words hurt almost as much as the insult itself. Not marriage, not love, not the man I had chosen to build a life with. Consequences. I tightened my fingers around the bouquet and stared at my reflection. My name is Laura Voss, though nearly everyone calls me Elle. I was 35 years old that morning. I had lived on my own for more than a decade, paid my own bills, built my own career, and somehow my father still spoke about me as though I were a teenager, threatening to ruin her life for a boy he did not approve of. I worked as a patient records coordinator for Mountain Crest Community Health in Lakewood. Most people had no idea what that meant. I made sure records moved correctly between clinics, physicians, laboratories, and insurance providers. When I did my job well, nobody noticed. When a file went missing or a medication history failed to transfer, suddenly everyone wanted to know who was responsible. I understood invisible work. So did Rafael Serrano. Rafe and I met in November of 2021 at a community food distribution event. I noticed him after most of the volunteers had already left. He was restacking pallets, counting damaged boxes, and helping an older woman whose car would not start. He did not make a show of it. He did not look around to see whether anyone was watching. He simply saw work that needed to be done and stayed until it was finished. That was Rafe. The first time I brought him home for dinner, my father asked what he did for a living before he asked where Rafe had grown up or how we had met. Rafe told him he was a shift lead at a Meridian Freight Group distribution center in Aurora. He explained that he had started as a forklift operator and still worked directly on the warehouse floor. My father ignored the words, shift lead. So you still drive a forklift, he said. Rafe did not flinch. Sometimes, he answered, when the floor needs it. After that, Victor introduced him to everyone as the warehouse guy. My father did not think of himself as cruel. He thought of himself as practical. He had grown up in a house where bills were paid late and the refrigerator was sometimes almost empty. He built a small commercial insurance brokerage from nothing, and somewhere along the way, he decided that titles, degrees, and salaries were the only reliable proof that a person was safe. He never asked whether Rafe was patient with me when I was exhausted. He never asked whether he listened when I was afraid. He asked whether Rafe had finished college, whether Meridian offered a pension, whether he planned to get out of the warehouse, and whether he would ever be able to afford a house in a neighborhood Victor considered respectable. My mother always softened the edges after he left the room. "Your father just wants to know you will be safe," Marion would say. "He needs time." Do not turn this into a war. I had spent most of my life managing the emotional temperature in our family. I changed subjects when my father went too far. I called back after arguments. I apologized for tones I had not used and intentions I had never had. At Thanksgiving, when Victor asked Rafe whether he had a real career plan, Marian did not tell him to stop. She asked me to bring out the pie. That was how peace worked in our family. My father created the discomfort, and my mother handed me the broom. Rafe had more reasons than most people to value stability. His parents died in a car accident in September of 2012. He was 19. His sister Marisol was 13, and his brother Owen was 10. Their aunt helped with the legal guardianship paperwork and some practical support. But Rafe took a night shift at Meridian 2 months after the accident. He paid most of the rent, kept food in the apartment, and made sure Marisol and Owen got to school. He never used that history to win sympathy from my father. He never believed he should have to. After our engagement in August of 2024, Victor offered to contribute $16,500 toward the wedding. The offer sounded generous until the conditions began. He wanted to control the vendors because he was paying. He wanted fewer guests from Rafe's side. He said warehouse co-workers could attend the reception but should not take up too many seats in the chapel. He even wanted the wedding materials to say that Rafe worked in operations rather than mention the warehouse. Rafe and I did not confront him then. Instead, we opened a separate savings account and quietly built a $12,800 emergency fund. We cut the imported flowers. We dropped the private cocktail bar. We simplified the decorations. At the time, I told myself we were being responsible. Standing in that bridal room, I understood that we had also been preparing for the moment my father tried to use money as leverage. The door opened without a knock. Victor stepped inside wearing the dark suit I had helped Marian choose for him. He looked at me from the veil down to the shoes, but he did not say I looked beautiful. "I gave you 8 months to think about this," he said. "This is not something I need 8 months to understand. You have made your choice." "Yes, I have." "Then I will not be walking you down that aisle." The words landed with less force than the calm certainty behind them. I looked at him and waited for some sign that he understood where we were. It was my wedding day. Music was being prepared on the other side of the wall. Rafe was already standing at the altar. "When did you decide this?" I asked. "When you proved you were no longer listening to reason. Did you wait until today because you thought I would panic and change my mind?" He shook his head. "I cannot participate in a decision I do not respect." Before I could answer, I saw Marian standing in the doorway behind him. Her hands were clasped tightly at her waist. I looked at her. "Did you know?" She glanced at Victor before looking back at me. "He mentioned it last night. I thought he would calm down by morning. But you knew he might do this. Elle, your father was upset. You knew, and you let me walk in here this morning without saying anything." She lowered her eyes. That silence hurt more than I expected. Victor turned toward the hallway as though the conversation were finished. Tess Hammond, the wedding coordinator, appeared a moment later with her headset pressed against one ear. She looked from my father to my mother and understood enough without being told. "We can pause for a few minutes," she said. "Celia can walk with you. We can ask Rafe to meet you halfway. We can adjust the order." Victor continued toward the chapel. He believed I would follow. Marian touched my arm. "Give him 5 minutes. Let him cool down." I looked at her. "And if he does not change his mind, at least you can say you tried." I had tried. I had translated his insults into concern. I had reduced our guest list. I had accepted his money with conditions attached. I had asked Rafe to be patient with people who had never offered him the same grace. Trying had always meant I endured a little more so nobody else had to change. A white handkerchief embroidered with my initials and my father's was tucked between the roses in my bouquet. I pulled it free and placed it on the dressing table. "Do not change the music," I told Tess. "Do not change the order. I will walk by myself." Marian stared at me. "Elle, you are making something difficult permanent." "No, Mom. I am only stopping myself from repairing things I did not break." Tess opened the door to the small foyer outside the chapel. The first notes of the processional began. Through the narrow gap, I could see my father settle into the last row, his shoulders rigid, still convinced I would not step through those doors without him. I stood there with my bouquet in both hands and listened to the music rise. For the first time in my life, I had no plan for making my father happy. Chapter 2. Everything They Refused to See. Tess touched her headset and asked the wedding party to hold their positions for another minute. The processional continued softly through the closed doors. I could hear the strings rising and falling, each measure carrying me closer to a moment I had imagined since Rafe proposed. Marian stood behind me, looking toward the chapel, as though she might still see Victor coming back. My hands were beginning to shake. I shifted the bouquet into my left hand and pressed my right palm against the fabric of my dress. Tess spoke quietly into her radio, confirmed the aisle was clear, then gave me a small nod. "Almost ready," she said. Marian stepped closer. "We can still wait, Elle." I did not answer. Waiting had always been my mother's favorite solution. Wait for Victor to calm down. Wait until dinner was over. Wait until the guests left. Wait until he had time to reconsider words he never took back. I looked through the narrow opening between the doors. Rafe was waiting at the altar, unaware that my father had just turned our wedding into another test I had failed by refusing to obey. The sight of him pulled me back to the night we announced our engagement. It was August of 2024, and Victor had invited us to dinner at the house in Highlands Ranch. Marian had prepared salmon and roasted vegetables. She had even opened a bottle of wine she usually saved for holidays. Rafe waited until dessert before taking my hand and telling them we were engaged. Marian gasped and hugged me. Victor looked at the ring, then at Rafe. He did not congratulate us. "How much do you have saved?" he asked. Rafe did not pretend to misunderstand. "Enough to pay our bills and keep adding to an emergency fund." "Did you finish college?" "No." "How long do you plan to stay in the warehouse?" Rafe sat back slightly. "I am not ashamed of working there. I lead the receiving shift and train new hires. There is room to grow, but I am not measuring my life by how quickly I leave the floor." Victor took a drink of wine. "So when do you plan to get a real job?" Marian immediately asked me to help carry the dessert plates into the kitchen. I followed because that was what I always did. I helped the room move past the damage before anyone had to name it. Later, in the parking lot, I apologized to Rafe. He stood beside my car with both hands in his coat pockets. He was not angry. That almost made it worse. "You do not need to apologize for words you did not say," he told me. "But you cannot keep standing between both sides and calling it peace." I had carried that sentence with me for 10 months. Behind me, Marian whispered that Victor might still change his mind. I kept looking toward Rafe. He had spent most of his life adapting to choices other people made. After his parents died, he entered Meridian Freight Group in November of 2012 and took the night shift because it paid slightly more. He tried taking community college classes when he could, but his schedule never stayed predictable. Once he was offered a move to the day shift that might have led to faster advancement. He turned it down because Marisol needed someone to drive her to school, and Owen was still too young to stay alone for long. Marisol was now a respiratory therapist at a hospital in Aurora. Owen worked in commercial HVAC. Rafe never spoke about them as proof of his sacrifice. Marisol once told me he hated when people made his past sound heroic. He believed he had done what family was supposed to do. That belief followed him into the warehouse. Lena Hart had returned to work after maternity leave and found her schedule changing almost every week. She was a warehouse trainer and a single mother. The problem was not her performance. Her numbers were strong. The problem was that a manager kept assigning her to different start times with almost no notice. Rafe did not bend rules for her. He read the scheduling policy, documented her performance, and helped propose a training rotation that fit within company guidelines. Lena kept her job without having to beg for special treatment. She was seated somewhere inside the chapel with 9 other Meridian employees. Darius Cole was there too. During his first month at Meridian, Darius entered the wrong lot code and delayed a shipment. Colin Rusk wanted to end his probation immediately. Rafe checked the training records and discovered that Darius had never received 2 of the required receiving modules. Instead of letting Colin use him as an example, Rafe took responsibility for completing the training, created a checklist, and monitored his work. Darius became one of the most accurate receiving associates on the shift. Those were the stories Victor never asked about. He saw warehouse boots and assumed failure. He saw a man without a degree and assumed there was nothing beneath the surface worth understanding. The worst example began in early 2023. The Aurora facility was drowning in backlog. Trucks waited for hours. Freight was being staged in the wrong areas. 2 major clients threatened to cancel their contracts. If both accounts disappeared, about 140 positions could have been cut. Rafe began recording arrival times, product categories, delays, and the mistakes that happened during shift changes. He did it for 6 weeks without being asked. He built a proposal around scheduled receiving windows, a different unloading order, and a simple checklist for new employees. Colin told him he did not have an analytical background and should focus on running his shift. A month later, one of the clients filed a formal complaint. Warren Okafor, the regional operations director, reviewed the proposal and approved a 30-day test. The average wait time dropped by 26%. Both contracts stayed. The job stayed with them. Then Colin presented the results to senior management as an operations initiative. Rafe's name appeared in an appendix as someone who had helped with implementation. Sam Keller had seen the original emails. He told Rafe he had kept copies of some of the files because the final record did not feel right. Rafe let it go. He needed stability more than recognition, and he did not want the team caught in a fight with Colin. When I learned what had happened, I wanted to show Victor the reports. I thought numbers might finally force him to see what I saw. Rafe refused. If he only respects me after seeing a chart, he said, then it is not respect. That was when I first understood that I had been asking Rafe to earn something Victor should have offered from the beginning. Tess spoke into her headset again. The last bridesmaid had reached her place. The doors would open in seconds. Marion reached for my elbow. Give your father 5 more minutes. At least then you can say you tried. I turned toward her. And if he still does not change his mind? Her mouth opened, but no answer came. Trying had always meant I waited longer. I absorbed more. I made the first call. I found the explanation that allowed everyone else to remain exactly as they were. Beyond the chapel, the 18 Meridian guests invited only to the reception were already arriving. The reception hall was on the same property, and guests had been asked to come early for parking and table assignments. 10 of Rafe's co-workers had seats inside the chapel. The others were gathering near the foyer. Marisol had known Victor might refuse to participate in the ceremony. She had mentioned the tension to Warren weeks earlier, but no one expected Victor to wait until the wedding day. Warren had planned to offer a few words at the reception about Rafe's character, nothing more. When Marion entered the chapel without Victor beside her, Marisol sent a message to the group that the ceremony was starting, and something seemed wrong. Tess knew several reception guests were waiting outside. No one had planned what happened next. The music shifted. Tess placed her hand on the door. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. The doors opened. More than 100 faces turned toward me. Victor sat in the last row with his hands locked together in front of him. He did not move. Rafe stood at the altar. The moment he saw the empty space beside me, his expression changed. He stepped down one stair. I gave him the smallest shake of my head. I did not want to be passed from my father's hand into my husband's. I wanted to walk into the life I had chosen on my own feet. I took the first step, then another. The wooden floor carried the sound of my heels through the chapel. Whispers moved behind me. I kept my eyes on Rafe. I was almost halfway down the aisle when the doors opened again behind me. For one impossible second, I turned and thought my father had changed his mind, even though I could still see him sitting in the last row. Chapter 3. The People Who Stood Up. Warren Okafor stepped through the doorway first. He wore a dark navy suit, but the people behind him did not look like a coordinated group. Some wore gray or black jackets. A few women had simple dresses and work coats folded over their arms. 2 men near the back still had heavy warehouse shoes on, polished as well as they could manage after an early shift. Inside the chapel, several of Rafe's co-workers who already had seats rose quietly. Others remained near the doorway until Tess stepped aside. She looked toward me. I understood the question in her face and nodded. The people in the foyer began moving into the back of the chapel. They did not crowd the aisle or form a perfect line. Some stood beside the last rows of pews. Others moved into the open spaces along the walls. 28 people in all had stood up or entered. No one applauded at first. The room was too surprised for that. I saw guests turning from Warren to Rafe, then toward my father in the last row. Marian looked at Victor as though she expected him to stand and explain what was happening. He remained seated. Aunt Celia rose from her place and moved toward the center of the pew opening space for Lena Hart and another Meridian employee. Warren stopped several feet behind me and spoke quietly with Tess. She leaned closer to hear him, then looked at me again. Would you like him to say something? I could have refused. Part of me wanted nothing more than to finish the walk, reach Rafe, and close the doors on everyone behind us. But I looked at the people standing there. Some had come directly from work. Some had only been invited to the reception. None of them had known that morning that my father would force me to walk alone. I nodded again. Warren did not step into the middle of the aisle. He remained near the back, keeping his voice calm. I do not know everything that happened in this family today, he said, and I have no intention of turning this wedding into a company event. I only want to explain why these people could not stay outside after seeing Elle walk in alone. The chapel became completely still. Rafe came to Meridian nearly 13 years ago while helping care for his younger brother and sister. Since then, he has become the person new employees look for when they do not know who else to ask. A process he helped create protected important contracts and helped our facility avoid serious job cuts. But that is not why he matters. He does not become important because I am standing here saying so. He was important long before anyone in this room knew his title. Warren stopped there. No list of awards, no long speech about numbers. He simply stepped back. Lena stood near the end of one pew, one hand resting against the seat in front of her. Rafe was the first supervisor who treated me like coming back after having a baby did not make me a burden, she said. He helped me understand the policy and made sure my work was judged fairly. She did not add anything else. Darius stood a few feet behind her. His voice shook, but he spoke clearly. Rafe was the first person who asked whether I had been trained correctly before deciding I was a bad employee. I looked toward my father. Victor's jaw had tightened. This was arranged, he said under his breath. It is a performance. Celia turned toward him. No, Victor. These are people you never bothered to ask about because you had already decided who Rafe was. My father looked at her as though she had betrayed him. Maybe that was how accountability felt to a man who had spent years expecting the family to protect him from it. I turned toward the altar. Rafe had stepped down from the platform. His eyes were wet, but his expression was steady. He moved a few steps toward me and stopped. Do you want me to come to you? There was no demand in the question, no assumption that I needed to be rescued. I looked at the people standing along the chapel walls and beside the pews. They were not replacing my father. They were not giving me away. They were witnessing me. I looked back at Rafe. No, I said, stay there. I am walking toward you. He nodded and returned to the bottom step. I continued down the aisle. The sound of my heels no longer felt like an announcement of what I lacked. Each step became something I was choosing. I passed Lena and Darius. I saw Sam Keller near the final row. Marisol stood beside him with tears running down her face. Owen had one arm around her shoulders. When I reached Rafe, he took both of my hands. I am sorry, he whispered. You should never have had to do that. You are not the person who owes me an apology. He looked past me toward Warren. Thank you. Then he looked around the chapel. But today is not about my job. It is about the woman who just walked this entire aisle by herself. A few people began clapping, then not loudly and not all at once. The applause moved through the room naturally until even guests who did not understand every detail were standing. Victor did not. The officiant waited until the room settled before continuing. Rafe and I returned to our places. When the officiant asked whether anyone had a lawful reason to object, the silence felt different from the silence before. It was not fear, it was finality. Marian cried quietly in the back row. I saw her wipe her face with a tissue, but I could not let her tears rewrite what had happened before the doors opened. Victor stared at the floor during our vows. When Rafe placed the ring on my finger, I did not feel that I had defeated my father. I felt that I had crossed a line I could no longer uncross. His approval was no longer the price of my future. By the time the reception began in the hall beside the chapel, Victor had already started changing the story. I saw him speaking to two cousins near the bar. I did not abandon her, he said. I wanted her to think carefully. That man from Meridian misunderstood a private family matter. One of the cousins looked uncomfortable and excused herself. Victor found me near the head table. You need to say something, he told me. I was still holding my bouquet. About what? About what happened in there. People think I refused to support you. You did refuse. I refused to participate in a decision I believed was dangerous. Those people turned it into a spectacle. They stood up after you sat down. His face hardened. Warren had no right to involve himself. He asked permission before he spoke. That does not make it appropriate. Marian approached us quickly. Elle, people are looking at your father as though he is some kind of monster. Can we please lower the temperature before this goes any further? I turned toward her. When I walked into that chapel alone, were you worried about how people were looking at me? She opened her mouth, then looked toward Victor. I was trying to keep the day from becoming worse. It had already become worse. You just wanted me to make it easier for him. Marian lowered her voice. This is still your wedding. Yes, that is why I am done spending it protecting him. Blair Monroe appeared beside me with her camera hanging at her hip. She waited until Victor moved several steps away before speaking. I recorded part of what happened before the ceremony, she said. I will not post anything unless you tell me to. I do not want it posted. She nodded. There is another problem. Someone recorded the aisle on a phone. It is already in the family group chat. Victor heard the final sentence. Who posted it, I do not know, Blair said. I want it deleted. No one answered him immediately. Victor looked at me. Tell them to remove it. I did not want strangers watching the worst moment of my wedding for entertainment, but I also would not help my father pretend the moment had never happened. I will not post anything, I said, but I am not going to tell people they did not see what they saw. Victor walked away without replying. Rafe joined me near the edge of the dance floor. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, and I watched his expression change. The message was from Colin Rusk. We need to talk before the comments about the Aurora project create problems for the company. There was no congratulations, no acknowledgement that Rafe had just gotten married, only a warning. Sam stood nearby and noticed the name on the screen. He looked at the message, then at Rafe. Before you answer him, Sam said, there are some things you need to see. I looked from Sam to Rafe and understood that the man my family had spent years dismissing might have been carrying the same kind of invisible weight somewhere else, too. Chapter 4. The Story They Tried to Rewrite. 3 days after the wedding, Rafe and I drove back from a small cabin outside Estes Park with 2 suitcases, a box of leftover cake, and our phones still full of messages neither of us wanted to read. We had chosen the cabin months earlier because neither of us wanted an elaborate honeymoon. It had a narrow porch, a stone fireplace, and no reliable cell service. For 3 nights, we cooked simple meals, walked along the edge of the lake, and tried to remember that we had actually gotten married. Whenever the signal returned, the family group chat filled again. The video from the chapel had not gone viral. There were no millions of views or strangers turning our wedding into entertainment. It had spread just far enough. Several relatives had seen it. A few members of Willow Ridge Chapel had received it. Some of Victor's friends knew what happened. Employees at Meridian had passed the clip between themselves after recognizing Warren and Rafe. My father could still defend himself, but he could no longer claim the scene had never happened. I muted the family chat before we left the mountains. The morning after we returned to Lakewood, Sam came to our house carrying a laptop bag and a thick folder. He placed both on the dining table. "I kept more than I told you," he said. Rafe pulled out a chair. "How much more?" Sam opened the folder. There were printed emails from February of 2023, the original truck delay logs, the first version of the receiving plan, and a copy of the file history showing when names had been added and removed. Then Sam turned the laptop toward us. One message from Colin instructed Rafe to move the proposal into the management presentation template. Another told him to remove the original author line from the front page because senior leadership preferred departmental ownership. Rafe read the messages twice. "You had all of this." "I saved it because the final presentation did not match what happened," Sam said. "I did not know whether you would ever need it." Rafe leaned back and rubbed both hands over his face. He did not look vindicated. He looked tired. My phone rang before any of us spoke again. The caller was my grandfather, Harold. He was still recovering from hip replacement surgery in Fort Collins, which Victor had described before the wedding as a personal commitment Harold considered more important than attending. I stepped into the kitchen to answer. "Grandpa, are you all right? I should be asking you that," he said. "Celia sent me the video." I closed my eyes. "I did not want you pulled into this. I was already pulled into it. I just did not know. He told me he had never said he opposed my marriage. He had planned to attend until his physician told him the drive and chapel seating would be too difficult during recovery. Your father knew exactly why I could not come," Harold said. "He had no right to use my absence to make you believe I agreed with him." The call lasted less than 5 minutes. It was enough. Victor had not only refused to walk me down the aisle, he had used my grandfather's health to make his position look like the judgment of the entire family. Later that afternoon, Marion called. She did not ask how I was feeling. "Your father has barely slept," she said. "People are asking questions. That video needs to stop circulating." "Are you worried?" "That I had to walk into the chapel alone. I am worried about all of us. That is not what I asked. I have spent years trying to keep this family together." I looked through the window at Rafe and Sam sorting the documents at the dining table. "You kept your marriage peaceful by letting me stand alone." She went quiet. I waited, but she did not deny it. The final wedding payment was due that same week. Victor had promised to cover another $3,900, but the transfer had never arrived. Rafe and I had already used our emergency fund to pay the venue and caterer in full. 2 days after Marion's call, Victor sent the money. The transfer included a note. "I keep my promises even when other people choose to humiliate me." I stared at the words for several seconds, then sent the full amount back. Rafe found me at the kitchen counter. "You are sure? If we keep it, he will tell everyone he paid for the wedding." "He will probably say that anyway. Then he can say it without using our bank statement as proof." At Meridian, Colin asked Rafe to meet privately. He placed a prepared statement on the desk and said Warren's comments at the wedding had created the false impression that Rafe alone had saved the Aurora facility. Rafe agreed immediately that the project belonged to the whole team. Then he read the statement. It described the plan as a management initiative that Rafe had only helped execute. "I cannot sign this," Rafe said. Colin folded his arms. "You are creating a problem over wording. The wording changes what happened. You are a shift lead, Raphael. You implemented a plan approved by management. I also wrote the first version of it." Colin's expression tightened. "If you want this to become a formal dispute, understand that formal disputes follow people." Rafe took a copy of the statement and left without signing. He consulted Elise Park, a labor attorney recommended by one of Medisol's co-workers. The meeting was brief. Elise did not promise a lawsuit or a large settlement. She told him that having credit taken was not automatically illegal. She advised him to preserve every email, file, performance review, and message. She also told him to document any retaliation or pressure placed on witnesses. Use the internal process first, she said. Tell the truth. Do not exaggerate it. Rafe submitted the documents to Andrea Cho in Human Resources. Andrea asked for the original files, edit histories, emails, presentation copies, and his 2023 performance review. She interviewed Sam, Lena, Darius, Warren, Colin, and Rafe. She estimated the review would take about 6 weeks. 2 days later, Colin sent a group email claiming that statements made outside the workplace did not accurately reflect ownership of the Aurora project. Sam forwarded the message to Andrea. She instructed Colin not to contact team members about the review again. That was the first visible consequence, but Rafe did not look relieved. One evening, I found him sitting on the edge of our bed staring at his phone. "What is it?" "I spent years making sure nobody saw me as difficult," he said. "Now that may be the only thing they remember." "You told the truth. That does not mean they will like me for it." I sat beside him. I kept apologizing to my family because I was afraid they would stop letting me belong. "You kept accepting less because other people depended on your stability." He looked at me. "I do not want to destroy Colin, and I do not want to destroy my father." "What do you want?" I thought about the question. "I want us to stop lying so other people can stay comfortable." Rafe nodded. "That is enough for me." Victor arrived at our house the following Sunday without calling. When I opened the door, he walked past me carrying a folder. Rafe came from the kitchen and stopped near the hallway. "Do you want me to give you privacy?" he asked. "No, this is your home too." Victor placed the folder on our table. It contained a statement he wanted me to post in the family chat, saying he had acted out of concern and the chapel incident had been misunderstood. "I am not posting this. People think I abandoned you. You did. I refused to endorse a decision I believed was dangerous." He glanced toward Rafe. "If he is really as capable as those people claim, why is he still working in a warehouse?" There it was, the same judgment wearing slightly different clothes. "That is what you still do not understand," I said. "You are only willing to respect him if he gets a title that makes you comfortable." Victor's face hardened. "I paid for that wedding." I opened the drawer beside the table and removed the invoices. Rafe and I had paid the final venue balance, the catering bill, the photographer, and every vendor Victor had threatened to control. I placed the pages in front of him. "You contributed part of the cost. We paid the rest. And none of it gave you the right to humiliate me." He pushed the invoices aside. "So now you are cutting off your family over one bad day?" "No, I am setting rules because you keep calling years of control one bad day." I opened the front door. "You do not come here without calling first. You do not use Mom or anyone else to pressure me. And I will not attend family dinners until you apologize to both of us without talking about the video, your reputation, or Rafe's job title." Victor stared at me. "You expect me to accept this?" "I expect you to decide what matters more, your pride or having an honest relationship with your daughter." He left without apologizing. I closed the door and stood with my hand still on the lock. Rafe came beside me and took my hand. "Setting boundaries with someone you still love hurts more than confronting someone you hate," he said. I finally understood that revenge was not making my father suffer. It was refusing to keep using my life to protect him from the consequences of his choices. Chapter 5. What Respect Cost Them. 6 weeks later, Andrea Cho called Rafe into a conference room at Meridian and closed the door. The review had taken until the end of July. Andrea had examined the original files, edit histories, emails, presentation copies, performance records, and statements from everyone involved. She had interviewed Rafe, Sam, Lena, Darius Warren, and Colin separately. She did not describe the result as a victory. She described what the evidence showed. Rafe had created the first analysis of the receiving delays. He had proposed the structure of the trial. Sam had organized part of the supporting data. Lena, Darius, and the receiving team had carried out the changes on the floor. Colin had presented the project without properly identifying where the work originated. Some of the results had been used in Colin's performance record, while Rafe's contribution remained buried in an appendix. HR did not say Colin had stolen every part of the project. There was no evidence that he had invented the entire plan or acted alone. There was enough evidence to show that the record had been unfair. Colin received a written warning. He was removed from Meridian's Operations Improvement Program for 1 year. The project file had to be corrected. His bonus review was reopened. He kept his job as operations manager. That mattered because real consequences did not always arrive in the dramatic form people expected. Colin did not carry a box out of the building while everyone applauded. He still worked in Aurora. He still attended meetings. The atmosphere around him became quieter and more careful. The record simply stopped protecting him. Rafe's performance file was corrected. He received an additional bonus of $7,200 for work that had not been properly recognized. Sam was credited for the data analysis. Lena Darius and the receiving team were named for implementation. Warren offered Rafe a position as an operations improvement supervisor at the regional office. The salary was higher. The title was the kind Victor would have understood immediately. Rafe did not accept it that day. He came home with the offer folded inside his work bag and placed it on our kitchen table. I read it while he stood at the sink drinking water. What are you thinking? I do not want to spend every day in an office, talking about people on the floor as though they are numbers. You would not have to become Colin. No, but I know the part of the job I care about. A week later, he accepted a different position as training and process lead. It came with a reasonable raise and more authority to improve onboarding and workflow. It also allowed him to remain close to the warehouse floor and the employees he actually wanted to help. He did not choose the title that would make my father feel foolish. He chose the work that still felt like him. Colin called him after the decision became official. "You destroyed a working relationship over something we could have handled privately," Colin said. Rafe stood near the back porch while I watered the small planter beside the steps. "I did not distribute the files," he replied. "I did not tell anyone to lie. HR asked for the records, and I provided them. You knew what it would do to my position." I knew what the records said. Rafe did not threaten him. He did not remind Colin that the project had almost cost 140 people their jobs. He simply refused to carry a false version of the story any longer. That was enough. A few days later, a letter from Marion arrived. She had written it by hand. She admitted she knew Victor might refuse to walk me down the aisle before the wedding morning. She had hoped he would change his mind because confronting him felt harder than warning me. She admitted that after the ceremony she had worried about his reputation before asking what the day had done to me. She wrote that she had spent years calling silence peace because it allowed her to avoid conflict. She did not ask me to forgive her. She said she had started seeing a counselor because she wanted to understand why she always asked the person being hurt to become more accommodating. I read the letter twice. Then I sat at the kitchen table and cried. Rafe did not tell me to call her. He made tea and sat beside me until I folded the letter again. 3 months after the wedding, I agreed to meet Marion at a coffee shop in Lakewood. I told her Victor could not come. She could not carry messages from him. She could not ask me to forgive him or use the phrase, "family is still family," as though blood erased responsibility. The meeting was uncomfortable. Marion began explaining that she had been frightened of what Victor would do if she challenged him. Halfway through the sentence, she stopped. "I am doing it again," she said. "I am explaining instead of taking responsibility." It was not healing. It was the first honest thing between us. We agreed to meet again, slowly, without pretending trust had already returned. Victor's first letter arrived in September. He wrote that he had not known how respected Rafe was or how much he had contributed at Meridian. That was when I understood he still believed the problem was a mistake in measurement. He thought he had underestimated Rafe's success. He had not yet understood that success should never have been the price of basic decency. I sent the letter back with a note. "You are still apologizing because you misjudged how successful he was. I need you to understand that he did not have to meet your standard of success to deserve respect." Victor did not respond. Celia stopped defending him during family conversations. Harold told him directly that using his surgery and absence to isolate me had been dishonest. Several of Victor's longtime friends asked why he had turned his daughter's wedding into a test of obedience. He did not lose his business. He did not lose his house. He did not become poor or publicly ruined. He lost something he had always assumed belonged to him. He lost the right to control how the family described what happened. He lost the position of being automatically believed. He lost access to my decisions simply because he was my father. In November, a second letter arrived. This one did not mention Meridian job titles, co-workers, or the video. Victor wrote that he had used wedding money to pressure me. He admitted that waiting until the ceremony was deliberate because he believed fear and embarrassment would force me to give in. He wrote that he had treated his presence as a reward for obedience. He admitted he had judged Rafe without trying to understand him. He also admitted that he had used Marion's silence and Harold's absence to make me feel as though the entire family stood against me. He did not ask to attend Thanksgiving. He did not ask me to forgive him. He wrote that he would respect the distance I had requested and accept that any future relationship would depend on his behavior, not his intentions. I did not drive to Highlands Ranch and fall into his arms. I sent one message. I read your letter. Change will matter if it continues after the apology. That was all. Maybe Victor would change. Maybe he would only learn to use better words. I no longer believed it was my responsibility to guarantee the outcome. Late that fall, Rafe and I invited a small group to dinner at our house. Marisol brought roasted vegetables. Owen arrived with 2 pies. Lena brought bread. Sam and Darius argued over who had made the better chili. Warren carried in folding chairs without being asked. Celia helped Blair clear the table before dessert. No one stood at the center of the room. No one paid for the evening and used that as proof they owned it. People carried dishes, washed glasses, packed leftovers, and made room for one another. Before she left, Marisol handed me a photograph. Blair had taken it from the back of the chapel. I was walking alone in the center of the aisle. Rafe stood ahead of me. Behind me, the Meridian guests had just begun rising from their seats. Victor was still visible in the last row. The picture did not show a woman waiting to be rescued. It showed the moment I chose my direction before I knew who would stand beside me. Rafe had not become valuable when Warren spoke for him. He had been valuable when he worked nights to keep Marisol and Owen safe, when he trained Darius instead of humiliating him, when he helped Lena use the policy she was already entitled to, and when he made sure the entire receiving team received credit for the project. I had not become strong when 28 people stood up. I had been strong when I opened the chapel doors while my father remained seated behind me. No one gave me to Rafe. No one gave me permission to belong. I walked into the life I had chosen. For the first time in my life, I did not turn around to check whether my father approved. I looked at the people who had chosen to show up, then kept living in a life where I no longer needed permission to belong. Would you have given Victor another chance after that second letter, or had the apology come too late? Share where you would have drawn the boundary, and stay with the channel for more stories about women who finally chose themselves.